Mike's one of our wonderful student workers that does all these things.
Yeah, I got you.
We do not.
That's fine. I'm just going to go ahead and...
There is a time in the back though, so if you look there, that's going to give you reference points of what the time is.
Okay, and I'm also just going to set it.
Okay.
I'm usually intuitively pretty good, but it doesn't hurt to...
You know, sometimes I feel like I can get to where I'm like talking and then all of a sudden it's like... Ready? Good evening, students, faculty, and our distinguished guests. My name is Jennifer Villalobos, and I'm the Assistant Director of Career Success in the College of Business. Tonight I have the pleasure of welcoming you all to an evening of celebration of women in leadership at our 2025 Susan J. McGregor Lecture, which will consist of both a presentation and a Q&A session. Students in both BA 162 and 168, please make sure to jibble in. If you have any issues with your jibble, you are going to address them at the end of this event, and our program managers will be outside to help you with that. Tonight, I would like to now introduce Anara Scott, our Senior Associate Dean of the College of Business. Let's give her a round of applause.
Hello and good evening, everyone. We are so happy that you are here with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. This is, as Jenny said, the 2025 Susan J. McGregor Memorial Lecture. This is our 9th McGregor Lecture, and we are just delighted to have all of you in person, and then all of you who are on the live stream. Welcome. We're glad that you are here. So tonight's event honors the legacy of a truly remarkable woman, Susan McGregor. Susan graduated from OSU's College of Business in 1985. She was a proud Alpha Phi, a true Beaver believer, and she carried that spirit with her into everything that she did. Susan had an extraordinary career. She started at the IRS. She moved to Coopers and Lybrand. She rose to become general manager at Microsoft, and she did all of this at a time when it was very unusual for a woman to be able to enter leadership roles in both finance and accounting and tech. So we lost Susan in 2014 after a courageous battle with brain cancer, but through her estate and in partnership with her family, she created scholarships, professional development opportunities, and this wonderful lecture series because she believed very deeply in lifting up the next generation of leaders. Susan's belief in education and opportunity is alive today here at Oregon State, and especially, we like to think, in the College of Business. As Oregon's land-grant university, we're committed to making leadership, innovation, and opportunity open for all. You can see that commitment in programs like the Business Catalyst Scholars, the Laurel Scholars, our Bound for Business program, and partnerships like the Boys and Girls Club of Salem. And in our student groups, we are so proud of our Women Mean Business Club, who are here tonight with us. And these are all opportunities for students to connect and build skills and lift each other up. When we talk about leadership at Oregon State, we mean leadership that looks like all of us. That looks like all of us. Leadership that's built on inclusion, community, and bold new ideas. Tonight, you all, every one of you here in this auditorium, out in your classes, everywhere that you look, you are part of this glorious future that Susan dreamed about. You are the reason that she invested in this college, in this lecture, and in all of you. So it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Shari Dunn. Shari's journey and the message she brings with her tonight are in many ways a perfect reflection of Susan McGregor's vision. Susan believed that leadership should be open to everyone, to new voices, new ideas, and new perspectives. And that's exactly what Shari challenges us all to think about. Shari has worn many hats. She's been an attorney, journalist, CEO, professor, and transformative change maker. And through every step, she has asked powerful questions, like who gets to lead? Why do outdated models still shape what we expect and what we see? How do we build communities where leadership reflects the real world? Shari's new book, Qualified: How Competency, Checking, and Race Collide at Work, offers a groundbreaking look at how hidden biases, especially around race and gender, influence who gets opportunities to lead. It's a really remarkable book, and I'm so excited you're going to get to hear from Shari about it. And for students who ask questions at the end, we have some copies of the book available. Beyond her leadership and experience, Shari is noted for helping people and organizations see possibilities, for challenging assumptions, encouraging growth, and sparking change. She believes leadership isn't about having all the answers, it's about having the courage to ask better questions. We couldn't ask for more than all of you and all of our students to think about how you can ask better questions. Tonight, Shari's here to speak directly to you about how leadership is evolving and about how all of you have the power to shape a future that's more inclusive, more innovative, and more true to who you are. So after her presentation, as long as there's time, we'll cross our fingers, we'll open it up for a few questions. So be thinking about what sparks your curiosity and what questions you might want to ask. And now, please join me in welcoming to the stage Shari Dunn.
Couple things I gotta do. So is mic, yeah, look at that, the mic's on. Hello, how's everybody doing? Good, okay. So I am so happy to be here today. This is just so exciting. You have no idea. So what are we going to talk about? Well, I am hopefully going to have a conversation with you and not just be talking at you. That is my goal. Hopefully it feels that way to you, that I'm talking to you and you and you and you and not just at you. So this keynote tonight is it's an invitation for you to reimagine leadership. And I tend to like to move around. I don't like to hide behind a podium. I mean, I have this nice dress on and whatnot. So I want to make sure that I get good stage coverage. But, you know, I want us to talk about how we can reimagine what it means to be a leader. And it was interesting. I do ask a lot of questions. I was a very annoying child, trust me. My poor mother. I was like, why, what? And it hasn't changed. I was just in Belize, and the guy was driving us around, and he said, well, if you have any questions, you know, let me know. And I go, I do. And I kept asking questions the entire trip. But he had a lot of answers, so that was great. So one of the things I like to start with is philosophy, because I have an undergraduate degree in the history of philosophy. Any philosophers out there? Ooh, we got one hand raised. Well, I tell you, philosophy to me is a lifelong discipline. And I love this quote because it's going to kind of anchor us as we go through this today. And that is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Does anybody have any idea what that might mean for you? Think about that. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. I also want to start my timer because I can talk forever. Like, you can't stop me. So I'm going to tell you, we're going to really specific. So we're going to do a little exercise here, and hopefully this will make this clear. So we get a lot of messages in our lives, all of us. And these messages become things that we just think it's the way it is, right? It's just the way it is. So I'm going to give you an example, which is why I wore this dress and this belt, so you can find out what the belt's about. So I have a long torso. Does anybody know? Is women out here know, folks, think about that? Okay, yes. I have a long torso. So all of my life, I thought I can't wear belts because they cut weird, and I'm like, oh, I look so weird in belts. I don't wear belts, right? That is the message. And so I never wore belts. So, oh, there's head nodding. Thank you. So then I went to a stylist, and she had me put some clothes on, and she goes, oh, this would look good with a belt. And I'm like, I don't wear belts. I can't wear belts. They look bad on me. And so she kept going, and she had me put this belt on, and there's another belt. And I was like, that belt kind of looks good on me. What? And this was an unconscious message that had become fate, right? I had never made it conscious in my mind that this message that I had wasn't a real message. It was just something I was telling myself. So we've all been told things such as, oh, and then I have another new thing. I have bangs. Like I was like, oh, can I wear bangs? And so people get these messages. Oh, your forehead's too big. It's too small. Your arms are too little, too big. All of these things, and they become just the way it is. So you can just do a show of hands. You don't have to say anything. But have any of you ever been told not to wear something by some? Oh, look at that, right? And that's a lot of people. And then it becomes something that you believe. What about, have you been told, oh, you're just too much? Yeah, okay, all right. And here's the thing none of us like to say. Have you made assumptions about others based on their background or appearance? Yeah, everybody should probably raise their hand because it's true. Right, no one's out here not doing that. But these are the types of personal assumptions that we make, right? These are the type of personal things that are unconscious, and we call it fate, okay? So that's what we're working on here. Oops. So there's also other things we carry, the stories we carry. So those things also become our fate. So I was a first-generation college student, and I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Anybody from Wisconsin here? No Wisconsinites? Well, okay, all right, we gotta have one cheesehead out there. But, and cheese is great. But yes, so I was a first-generation college student, and it's very intimidating, right? You go onto this campus, you feel like everybody knows everybody. It really feels like people already knew each other, and they knew how to do this. And the fact of the matter is, even if they had family members or friends, it was new to them too, right? But it felt so new. It felt so different that it can be alienating, and it can make you kind of withdraw because you feel like, well, I don't know the rules of this, right? So that's a message you tell yourself. And then I went to Northwestern Law School, and race and class divide became an issue. So I come from a working class family in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Both my parents were union. My mother worked in a hospital. My father was in like construction trades kind of thing. So I didn't really have any exposure to, I went to law school with people who had private planes, okay? So this was very different world also. Things that I did not have any marker for. And what I had to decide was, I am here and I belong here. Like I had to make that conscious decision, because without making that decision, I'm going to be overwhelmed by all of the fears, and mainly internal fears. And then there were issues around class, even within people from my, quote, grouping, right? I met a lot of other African-American people at that school who were from very elevated financial class, and I was not. And it was very difficult for me to figure out where I fit or how that worked, right? So those are some of those unconscious messages. And then I want to talk about one more, which is our cultural and family messages. You know, we have messages from our family. The Jones don't like pizza, I don't know. Or the Smiths, we don't go to movies, or I don't know, whatever. Like families have these stories we tell, right? So those are the unconscious things that we have to make conscious. We have to say, wait a minute, why is it that way? Maybe I do like pizza just because I'm a Jones. That doesn't mean I can't like pizza, right? So that's where we're going today. So one of the things that we unconsciously think about is what leadership looks like. So I was just talking about on the micro level. Now we're going to talk about the macro level. These bigger unconscious stories that just become fate. It's just the way it is. I mean, nobody's doing anything. It's just the way it is. So leadership falls into that category. So has anybody ever heard of the great man theory of leadership? Oh, we got a couple hands. All right. So the great man theory of leadership is a theory that says, and it's traditional more in Western culture, and it says that a man, generally, is the leader, usually male, and from this perspective, the leader always knows what to do, how to do it, and the role of the followers is to simply just do it. You ever heard that slogan before? Just do it, right? And so, under the great man theory of leadership, the leader knows everything, and the leader doesn't ask any questions, and the leader is not vulnerable, and the leader is impenetrable, and the leader doesn't have any bad days, and the leader has all the answers. And this is how we have generally thought about leadership. And even if it's not conscious, it has been an unconscious thing of how we think about leadership in this country. Again, different countries have different ways of approaching leadership, but in the United States, we think about this great man, this one person who has all the information. So why do we think that? Well, I mean, to be honest, that's who was leading for most of our history. And to be fair to those in the great man theory model, it's not like they really had a choice either. It's not like even within the in-group, there was a way to do it differently. The assumptions were, this is how you do it, so you follow it. So let's talk about what our workplace has looked like, and then we're going to get to the workplace that you are going to be responsible for, because you are going to be responsible for the workplace as it goes forward. So let's go back. Let's go way back in time, 1860. Most people worked in farms. They didn't really work in offices, and if they did, all office workers were men. Okay, so that's kind of where we go. Then we're going to go to the 1900s. Women come into office spaces, and they take up these administration roles, but they have to leave if they get married or have children, right? So they're there, and that kind of is how it goes well into the 60s. So in the 60s, we have civil rights legislation that seeks to remove blockages that prevent black people, other people of color, and women from entering professional workspaces. Now, I want to be clear. All of these people always worked, okay? So they worked in farms, they worked at home, they worked. But in professional working spaces, the spaces we're talking about today, those spaces they did not have access to. So now we're in the 60s. So 1972, the first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company, that was Katharine Graham of the Washington Post, and she actually inherited that CEO position. Interesting story, her father was the head of the Washington Post, and he did not make her the head, he made her husband the head of the Washington Post. And then her husband died, and that's how she became the head of the paper that was her own family's paper. So that's how that happened, all right? So then today, oh, we go too fast. So today, we have today at this moment, the most diverse professional workforce in history. Managers are expected to be strategic, they're expected to foster innovation, they're expected to know all of these things, because this workforce looks very, very different than any of the workforces before it, and in some ways different than the way the workforce was intended to look. So the early years of women in the workforce really had to do with things like assimilation, teaching women how to act like men. I don't know how many women out there are old enough to remember this, but in the 80s, women would go to work with the big shoulder pads and the tennis shoes, look like they're ready for scrimmage or a football game, and trying to mirror this toughness of men. And then we have accommodation. Well, we're going to adapt to women's unique needs and situations. We're going to bring in maternity leave, things of that nature. And then we have celebration. We're going to emphasize women's unique talents, but part of that also did a bit of segregation, so that women ended up in women-like roles. So the head of HR, you find a lot of women in HR because it was seen as a helping role for women, okay? So that's kind of how we get here. So then in the modern vernacular, something some of you may be more familiar with, we have multicultural, which is, we want to have lots of cultures together, but that doesn't mean people are interacting. It just means they're there together, okay? And then we have cross-cultural, we're going to communicate, but we still have kind of an idea of a norm, which would be a dominant culture. And then what we want to get to is intercultural, communication where there is a deep understanding and respect for all cultures and the development of deep relationships. It's these real relationships with people that we have to start to learn to have. Because it is only through these real, authentic relationships that we're able to communicate with each other across our differences in any meaningful way. And yet, to a large extent, our society is set up as such that we don't have these interactions. So as leaders, you're going to have to find out how to get the skills to get past that. Because there are, in fact, barriers in our way to have these authentic interactions. So, this is a quote from my book because, of course, we have to talk about my book. The quote is, "When the hand of systemic inequity is hidden, the impact can be misidentified as the cause." So when we don't know what is going on, what is happening that is causing the problem, we can misidentify. So, for instance, we could say, oh, we don't have a lot of female CEOs because women aren't interested in being CEOs. Right? That would be the logical conclusion, but that's not the conclusion. Because the system was that Katharine Graham could only become a CEO because her husband died, right? And we really didn't have a structure that put women in those positions. Even today, we're going to have less women in leadership because women start the leadership race later. So this is the hidden hand that I'm talking about. So you don't want to misidentify the cause with the reason. Does that make sense? You don't want to misidentify the cause with the reason. And so we want to try to get at the cause. So in my book, Qualified, How Competency Checking and Race Collide at Work, I talk about this concept called competency checking. So I was teaching at University of Portland. I taught MBA students, nonprofit, and it gave me a lot of time to think. I was thinking about, like, what is going on in the world? And so being able to teach, it made me think, like, okay, what would I name things? And then as a consultant, I was talking to people, and they were telling me very similar stories. They were having very similar experiences. They were having similar frustrations. And I thought, okay, somehow I have got to name this. What is the name of this? We can talk about something big like unconscious bias, but like, what does that mean? And how does that work? And how does it even happen? And that's what I was trying to achieve with competency checking. And so competency checking, the idea is that there is an invisible weight on Black people, women, and other workers of color, making it harder for them to succeed no matter their qualifications or skill. So how does that show up? Well, competency checking is unspoken but pervasive, and it scrutinizes these workers more harshly than their white or male counterparts. And then it operates consciously or unconsciously by viewing these workers as inherently less capable, regardless of their qualifications or experiences. And then this is a practice of competency checking has been embedded into our workplaces for hundreds of years, creating blockages. So what does all that mean? I'm going to give you an example. So there are two studies that I reference in the book. One is a legal memo. So there was a small kind of, I guess, research done by a company called Nexium, it's in the book, and they wrote a legal memo. And in the legal memo, they made certain errors. It was just one memo. And they sent it out to law firm partners, and they told one group that it was written by a Black associate, and they told the other that it was written by a white associate. And when they reviewed the memos, they took the one that was written by a black associate and they found all of the errors plus things that weren't errors, and they rated the associate needing more work on their writing. Separate group was given the same memo, and they were told it was written by a white associate. They did not find all the errors, and they rated the person a good writer. So similar research was done for a research associate position with men and women. A woman researcher, who's not real, just fictional, all the information was the same. She was presented to the group as a researcher, and she was offered less mentoring, less money, and fewer positions. The one who people thought was a male researcher was offered more money, more mentorship, and more positions, okay? So competency checking then, in a practical matter, means people are activated to ask more questions, look more deeply, and require more from people who they don't assume or associate with leadership or presence in that position. So that's the practical ways that competency checking works out. So I feel like I'm going the wrong way. So the thing about competency checking and all of these things is it acts as a fine grade mesh wire. Think of it like this. So you hear a lot of times that the pipeline is empty. We just don't have women. We just don't have people of color who want to do this. I don't think the pipeline's empty. I think the pipeline is blocked. And what is blocking the pipeline is assumptions about who is qualified and who has the ability to lead and who should be in spaces. So I'm going to give you another example. So in the book, I talk about computer science degrees. And we talk about the fact that, you know, there aren't a lot of people of color, specifically Black and Hispanic, Latinx folks in computer science. But actually, what the data shows is there are more people getting those degrees who are graduating than who are showing up in the pipeline. So what's blocking them? Well, one of the things we know is blocking them is prestige bias. So what that means is that when you're talking about getting a job at some of these top companies, they want you to have gone to Harvard or Yale or this type of thing, right? So that prestige bias acts as a block. And you say, oh, there's nobody here. I don't see anybody. I don't see anybody. I don't see anybody from Madison or Marquette, or, you know, I don't see anybody from University of Texas, Houston. You know, you don't see them there because of the prestige bias. So that doesn't mean the pipeline is empty. It means the pipeline is blocked. And so where am I going with all this? I'm going with you are going to have the power as the next generation of leaders to fundamentally change how we approach and how we think about who should have leadership. And if we shift our thinking here, then we understand that we're not talking about giving people special advantage. We're not talking about giving undeserving people opportunity. We're talking about removing blockages that are blocking people from getting access. That's what we're talking about. And that is a very different solution than if you think we're talking about, oh, these are just poor people, there's nobody in computer science, there's no women who want to do research position. If that's what you think, then your solutions are going to be off. If you realize that there are blockages in the way, you are going to work much harder to remove those blockages. So that's what we're going for. So I want to give you another example of when you hide the hand of systemic inequity, the result can seem like the cause. So this is data from the Economic Policy Institute. It was on their website when I wrote my book. It may not be now, but this comes from the Economic Policy Institute. This data is not made up. And what they found is that Black workers were twice as likely to be unemployed as white workers overall, and Black workers with a college degree were more likely to be unemployed than similarly educated white workers. But this is what I find most interesting, that when they are employed, Black workers with a college degree or advanced degree are more likely than their white counterparts to be underemployed when it comes to their skill level. And so they did this data, I think it was in 2019, when it was a tight labor market. So what that means is that explodes a myth that we have. And the myth is that, oh, well, the reason there aren't people in managerial or executive positions is because they're not there or they don't have the education. Well, that's actually not true. That they have the college degree and advanced skills, but they tend to get jobs that are not commensurate with their education and skills. And one of the things we know about being underemployed when you get a job is that people who are underemployed tend to stay underemployed longer, meaning they continue throughout their career. So that means if you are trying to get to be a VP, you're a senior director, but you don't get to be a VP. And I tell people, nobody's born a VP, okay? I mean, you have your suits on, but you weren't born with little suits on, right? You have to get there. You have to learn. You have the opportunity. And so that is really more of what is missing. So what do you do about all this? You're like, oh, this lady is depressing. I don't know what she's talking about. Oh, and she's pushing the buttons all wrong. All right, so again, I have an undergraduate degree in the history of philosophy, so everything comes back to your mind for me. But you want to change your thinking and change your life. Now it's like a church sermon, but you do. You want to change your thinking to change your life. And so we're going to talk about how you can do that, how you as leaders can do that. So one of the biggest things for me is how we communicate across our differences. I think that is so very important. I can tell you as a consultant, 90% of the workplace problems that I have encountered with clients comes down to communication problems. And it sounds like, oh, that's simple, but it's not. When we open our mouths, we are not necessarily always communicating the message we think we are. So and we have all of these differences that we're going to learn to communicate around. So here's another quote. We think we see the world as it is, when in fact we see the world as we are. So that is really important to understand. We think we see the world as it is. I'm like, oh, look, this is just what it is. But what I am seeing it is the way I am, through my lens. You know what I heard recently? We may not all see the same color blue when we look up in the sky. Anybody know that? It's crazy. I mean, how would I know? I mean, I don't know what you're seeing, because we can't get in another person to fully understand. And it's quite possible when we are looking at the sky, we are seeing slightly different colors. So if that's the case, then we really cannot assume that we are seeing the world as it is. All we can say is that we can see it as we are. That's all we can really be sure of. And some days I'm not sure of that. So the workplace has changed from 1890, right? So you as a future leader, as a future manager, are not coming into the workplace of 1890 or 1960 or even 2000. I was talking to Susan's sister before the talk, and she was saying that Susan was a leader in breaking barriers into the 2000s. Let that sit with you. We're still in it, into the 2000s. That's a scant few years ago that she is still the first, only woman in spaces and places. So the workplace has changed, but it's been slower than we perceive it to be. But it's moving faster than we have built our capacity for it. So that's what we're going to try to do, talk about this. So I like this graphic because every time we are talking to another person, there's a lot of things in that, right? It's culture loading, their behavior, their history, their traditions, ethnicity. I was an exchange student in London such a long time ago. And the students from London and from Europe said, "Why do Americans lie so much?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Well, they'll say, we'll get together later, or I'll see you later, or let's do something later." And they did not understand that people didn't mean that. that it was just something people said. Because culturally, they just didn't talk like that. And they were like, yeah, I called him up later and he didn't want to do anything. Because it's just something we say, right? And then even regionally, we have different dialects, different ways we talk. You know, everybody knows that yes means a million things. Yes, 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 right? There's like all these ways. So if something as simple as yes can be misinterpreted, then you have to imagine every time you're talking to another person, it's almost like you're translating. And we have this experience with people we know, our friends and our families, right? So one of the things you have to understand as a leader is how you approach thinking about thinking, which I know sounds reductive, but I didn't just make that up. You do have to think about how you think about thinking. So there are signals that we read too fast. So has anybody ever heard of Daniel Kahneman and his book, Think Fast and Slow? Yeah, couple of folks here. So Daniel Kahneman talks about system 1 and system 2 thinking, right? System 1 thinking is our fast thinking. It's a big part of our brain. And it's built that way on purpose. Our brains are built that way because we are human animals up on 2 feet. But for most of our existence, we're out in the wild, actually, with other animals, trying not to get eaten and trying not to get killed. And so this part of our brain developed faster, bigger, stronger. And what that means is that part of our brain has us make quick associations, quick assumptions. It's necessary. It was necessary for our survival, okay? Now, in this modern world, we still use that part of our brain, but in a way that can be destructive. Now, it is simply what it means to be human. There's nothing wrong with us. We're not bad because we have more system 1 thinking, but it requires us to understand that it is there. We can't say, somebody told me, I don't have any unconscious bias. I'm like, well, are you alive? Because there are so many things we don't like unconsciously. It's quick associations. I mean, I don't like Diet Coke. Why are you drinking that? I don't understand that. You know, so there are things, right? We all have these things that, boom, that is how we think. That is in our mind. So we do this with school pedigree, as I was talking about, this prestige bias with degrees. I lived in Washington, D.C., and I remember I was very young, and you would go to a party, and people would ask you questions to see where you went to school. I'm not kidding. And I was married at the time, and I would have a joke with my husband. I'd say, I'm just going to keep saying small things to see how long they're going to go to ask me. So they'd say, where'd you go to school? The Midwest. Where'd you go to law school? Illinois. Where in Illinois? Chicago. I'm like, dude, how many questions are you going to ask me to get to where I went to law school, right? So prestige bias is really strong in us. It's just a quick association. Zip code, where you're from, your hairstyle, your clothing. So, of course, we do this with race and gender. Of course we do this because our brains are designed to make quick associations without a ton of information. So there's also things like region. Anybody here from the South? American South? You know, the Southern drawl. People think people like, oh, they must be slow because they talk like that. You know, I've heard Southerners complain about that. Or having a rural accent. Oh, that person is uneducated. Or slang. Or if English as a second language. People assume, oh, they lack comprehension, which is why you have people going to foreign countries yelling at people and yelling at them slowly as if that's going to make them understand English better, right? So we have these stereotypes in our heads and they come through very quickly. So what we have to do is we have to slow down and we have to use more system 2 thinking. System 2 thinking is deliberate and it requires us to step back and really think about why we think what we think. So, as leaders in this new world, you're also going to have other things you have to kind of navigate. So we had lots of generations in the workforce. We had traditionalists and silent generation. We had baby boomers who's still in the workforce. We have Generation X, that's me, whoop, whoop, on Generation X. We have millennials, we have Gen Z, and we have Gen Alpha on deck. That's a lot of people. And so, a lot of people say generations, that doesn't really matter. That's very generic. Yeah, you can't say all the people of a certain time period, but there are references. I'm not going to make a Scooby-Doo reference here. It's not a hill I'm going to die on, And, there are references that Gen X is going to understand and that Gen Z is going to understand, or millennials. And so when you're in the workplace with all of these people, with all of these different things, now you're getting it? That is why we have to develop the skill and ability to communicate and understand across all these differences. So I'm going to ask you a question. Someone says, I want to assign a project with a significant technical component, and then it's something with a computer. And the person says, I don't think she's great with computers. Now, the person doesn't know. They just say, I don't think so. Do you think they're talking about a millennial? How many people think they're talking about a millennial? No. Do you think they're talking about a Gen Xer? Okay, don't you say that. How many people think they're talking about a baby boomer? Yeah, that's association, right? That's a quick association. And eventually they're going to be talking about a Gen Xer. but if you are managing in this workplace, you are dealing with a much more complex workplace, people with different ages, different genders. And then we also want to talk about social class transitioners. I'm a social class transitioner. And a social class transitioner is someone who transitions between class in their lifetime. And it can feel very isolating for a social class transitioner because you feel like, oh, everybody in this office, they all go skiing in Colorado or something every winter. I've never done that, right? And as a manager and as a consultant, I am very conscientious when I do icebreakers. I try to make my icebreakers accessible to everyone. So I might say, what's your favorite time of year as opposed to what's your favorite vacation? That's assuming everybody went on vacations when they're kids, and they may not have, right? And why does that matter? It seems like such a small thing, but you put people in a position where they have to lie, or they don't say anything, right? So that creates this really weird environment. So I try to think about, what is accessible? What can everybody jump in on, and I not assume about their background? But the thing about social class transitioners is they're people who are good with observation. Right? They may be very helpful and able to see things that other people can't see, because when you are coming from different racial, ethnic, class backgrounds, you pay a lot more attention to everything because you're trying to understand it, you're trying to figure it out. So in your workplace, you're going to have all these kind of folks. So now I'm going to talk to you real quick about how you can communicate across these differences, but I want to say something before I get into this. There is a big difference between stereotyping and cultural competency. So as we talk about some general differences among folks, I want to make sure that stereotyping is like saying, I read a book and I know everything about this subject. Anybody know anybody like that? I've known people like that. They're like, you do not know everything about that. But they read one book and they know everything about it. Cultural competency is having a library of information, and you use it as reference material, not as dispositive of everything, right? So to be cultural competent, you're going to pull information from a vast things, and you're going to ask more questions. You're going to be curious, but that doesn't mean you have the definitive answer. So I do want to talk about that just as we get here, because cultural competency is, oh, I have some knowledge of this and I want to know more, as opposed I know everything about those people. That is stereotyping. So just so we get the difference. So researchers have said, and some agree, some disagree, I tend to like this framing, that there are different patterns, cultural patterns around communication. I'm not going to talk about all 6, but we have different communication styles, different attitudes toward conflict, different approaches to completing tasks, different decision-making styles, different attitudes toward disclosure, different approaches to knowing. So we're going to talk about just a couple of them. Different approaches toward conflict. Different cultures approach conflict differently. Not everybody believes in talking it out right away, right? Eastern cultures tend not to like direct conflict, more indirect conversation. Women generally, it's a general, not all women, because I'm pretty direct with conflict. I don't mind conflict. But generally, women tend to go more indirect. It doesn't mean that direct conflict is always bad and indirect is always good. It means there are differences. And if I am managing people, if I'm responsible for people, I am actually responsible for understanding that different people approach things differently. And it's on me as a manager, director, or whatever to appreciate that and try to suss that out. In fact, I might ask someone, how do you deal with conflict? How do you best take criticism? How do you feel? And my goal is to try to understand that and fold that into that process, okay? Then we have different approaches to completing tasks. This is really an interesting one. From culture to culture, people have different ways they approach completing tasks. Now, I was doing some work for Tillamook, I don't think they mind, as one of my clients, and you know, they have a lot of workers there who are Hispanic, Latinx people who work there. And one of the things culturally is sometimes people from different cultures and women tend to like to chit-chat a little at the beginning of a project. That doesn't mean they're doing anything bad. It means in order to start the project, they like to start to build a bit of a foundation of a relationship. Western culture, and generally male culture, but again, these are broad generalities, but tend to like to start the project and develop the relationship in the project. Neither is bad, but what happens is the ones who like to chit-chat, that is seen as somehow negative. Now, what I say to people is, did the project get done? Did the project get done on time? If that's the case, you don't need to police how people start or get into the project, right? As long as the project's done, it's done the way it's supposed to do, you don't need to police that. You just have to understand that different people have different ways of getting into the relationship for the project, that's all. And historically, we have seen one way as superior, start the project, develop the relationship, but it's not necessarily. It's not terrible, but it's not the only way. So that's a kind of a concrete example. And then different attitudes toward disclosure. That's what I was referring to about when I do icebreakers. For a variety of reasons, people have different feelings around disclosure. There's something called status confirming bias. So people tend to not want to say things that they think is going to confirm a negative aspect of themselves because they're worried that you're going to then be biased. If I say, oh, I grew up in a single parent household, oh, she's from a lower class, she probably does, you know, they're afraid of all these things you're going to think as a result of it. And so consequently, when we are in office spaces and we push people to disclose things publicly, I'm like, you know, because it is very difficult. Not everyone wants to do that. You have people who are LGBTQIA who may not want to talk about their family structure in that way, and maybe they're not out to their family. You just don't know. So consequently, you want to think about what are more neutral ground things that I can interact with people, but also don't punish people for being uncomfortable with disclosure, because that happens in the workplace. People say, oh, she's not very friendly, he's not very forthcoming. He has a different cultural attitude toward disclosure. I had a student at University of Portland, a young woman who's Asian, and she was not born in the United States, so she's the first generation in the United States. And my class had, you know, participation, the dreaded participation. And she said to me after class one day, she said, you know, my culture, women don't do this, like raise your hand and you know, stand out. And I was like, oh, that was helpful to know. I said, you know what, you can send me notes on reflections from the classes as a participation. And I said, if you want to try occasionally to raise your hand, you can, but you know, we're going to do that. And in doing that, she helped me understand so that I didn't assume she's not engaged. She just doesn't care, right? We just get on this whole thing. And she actually raised her hand a couple times, so to give it a try. So now at this point, you're like, what am I supposed to do? I'm just here trying to get an education. I can't do with all this. Well, there are things that you can do. You can change your thinking and you can change your systems. You got to have one more quote before we end, because you know I love my quotes. It takes a conscious thought to interrupt an unconscious bias. It takes a conscious thought to interrupt an unconscious story, which means I have to say, wait a minute, I may not know the answer, but I know there's an issue. It's in law school, they teach you, it's called issue spotting. You don't have to know the answer to everything, but you gotta be able to spot the issue. So you wanna be conscious to the fact that there may be something that you're missing. So what I wanna, as I beginning to wind down, what I wanna leave you with is a new concept of leadership, and that is called the leader as learner. You can be a leader learner. You can be a leader learner, and you can be a leader learner. Everyone can be a leader learner. And what does that mean? Well, instead of the great man theory of leadership, we are in a world that is diverse and it is changing every minute. And what that is going to require of each of you is to step into leadership in a different way. And that means being open to learning and showcasing for those who you are leading that learning is okay. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to tell people to just do it. And that doesn't mean you're a bad leader. We have to break the grip of the great man theory of leadership that lives in our mind unconsciously. And we have to consciously choose another path, which means I have to say as a leader, hey, I don't have all the answers, but I'm very interested in what you can help me understand. And then I will make decisions. I'm not talking about collaboration paralysis, okay? I'm not talking about a situation where everybody has, and no decisions are ever made. I don't mean that. But I mean, as a leader learner, you are going to be the one who showcases it is okay to make mistakes, it is okay to seek more information, and it is okay not to know everything. And in doing that, you open up the space for other people to learn and grow. You, as the leader, are the top learner. You are the one who is showcasing what it means to learn. Oops. So as a leader learner, admit what you don't know. You're going to ask better questions. You're going to make space for dissent. And then you're going to be changed by new information. So it's not performative, right? I was in a meeting once with somebody who said, I'm open to suggestions. They were definitely not open to suggestions. That is not, that's performative, right? You're going to have that energy where you really are able to be changed by new information, because that makes your work better, it makes you better, and it's okay. I was talking about this in Multnomah County. I spoke for some county executives, and this gentleman came up to me after, and he said, I'm so glad to hear this. I get so stressed out. I don't have all the answers. And it's like, no, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you're stupid or bad or dumb. It means you are a learner and you are asking questions and you are getting better at it all the time. And you can still be a decision maker and be a learner leader. Two things don't X each other out. So, I am going to release you all from perfection. You're released, okay? You do not have to be perfect as the leader, okay? You can, now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. And that is a real quote. I should tell you, I've checked all these quotes. I don't know if you all know, the internet just lies. All these quotes are not true. These quotes are true. But yes, now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. And you can be good at your job and good at your interactions with people, but you do not have to be perfection at them, because that is not necessary. That standard is rooted in the great man theory, and there was never anybody who was perfect at it. There are people who are stressed out, they were yelling, they were saying wrong things, they didn't know what they were doing. But, oh, there's my time. See, I actually turned it on so I would know. There we go. So I got a little bit more. But now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. So I do want to talk about, just real quick, as you go into the workforce, this is going to matter. So this is some research around challenges and obstacles that teams face. A lack of trust, poor communication, conflicting priorities, unclear roles and responsibilities, and resistance to change. Those are all rooted in leadership. You can empower through collaboration. Collaboration does not have to be the worst thing ever. You don't have to get stuck there. This quote, "The performance of the whole is never the sum of the performance of its parts. It's the product of their interactions." The sum of the whole is the product of its interactions, which means your ability to lead and manage people. I was doing the interview earlier and I said, think of yourself as a symphony conductor, okay? You can't have all woodwinds. You can't have all strings. You have to be able to say, I want a little more bass. I want less over here. That is your role as a leader, to be able to hear where the sound is off, right? And be that type of conductor. So think of this as part of your continuous improvement. And you're going to have a growth mindset, and innovation can come from this. So you want to listen. And I'm not going to go through it because I do want to take your questions. So we're going to move through this slide. But you're going to listen, and you're going to not just listen, you're going to listen. So I'm going to tell you how you know if you're listening. If the moment someone finished speaking, you start talking, you weren't listening. Because at the end of their last few words, you were formulating your response. So that's how you know you weren't listening. If there's a little gap there, you may have had time to reflect on the last thing they said. So I want to leave you, before we get to questions, with the 3 most powerful questions, I think, as a leader that you can have. And I don't know where it went. Did I do that? Okay. Well, I can tell you what it is. This is how I see it, but how do you see it? That is what you will ask. This is how I see it, but how do you see it and mean it? This is what I think I heard you say, but do I have that right? Do I have that right? And then the final thing is there anything I'm missing? Is there anything I'm missing? And in asking those things, you lean into yourself as the leader learner, right? You open yourself up to really get that feedback. Those are powerful questions that you can use. And your generation is up next, and there is a lot facing you. And you cannot live in these old models. Oh, thank you. You're going to bring up my 3 questions. And you cannot live in these old models. Those clothes don't fit anymore. The great man theory. You have to step into a new way of being, and I know that your generation can do it. So we're going to go to questions. I think.
So I just want to say that was amazing, and I think you're all going to take away amazing moments and reflections and questions. But we have actually come to the end of our time, unfortunately.
No.
But I know Shari is dying to answer your questions. So maybe if you can hang out for a couple of minutes.
I can.
We will, we'll let
I
folks.
thought I had that set for 45 minutes. I think I should have
It's
done
because,
almost.
you know what, we talked too long.
We
set you up for failure. I'm sorry. That's on us. That's our fault. So I just want to thank you again for a wonderful, wonderful, inspiring speech and lecture. Let's just remember that Susan McGregor is why we are here tonight, and she believed deeply in building a future where every leader's potential could shine. And tonight, thank you for honoring that belief. Thank you all for being here. Travel safely home. And if you'd like to ask Shari a couple questions,
I'll be here for questions.
please come up. Thanks so much, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't
know it was our fault.
I said it for 45.
You did
I should have
great.
said it